If you'd seen us that night, you would have thought we were one of those couples in magazine articles about power and purpose. It was a charity gala in Atlanta, white lights, overpriced wine, and people pretending to care about the causes printed on their name tags. I was there representing the community center I worked for, trying to secure funding for our youth programs. Bryce Whitman was there because people like him are always their men who donate six figures for a photo and a headline that says philanthropist. He spotted me during cocktail hour. I remember his suit was perfect, not a wrinkle in sight. He asked what I did, and when I told him about the kids at the center, he leaned in like every word I said was fascinating. That was his first trick attention as performance. I didn't recognize it then. I thought I'd met a man who actually listened. Within weeks, there were dinners at restaurants I couldn't afford, surprise bouquets at work, and late-night phone calls where he talked about wanting to make a difference. He said I made him believe in something again. When you've spent your life working paycheck to paycheck, it's easy to mistake comfort for love. My mother didn't trust him. She said, "Men like that don't marry women like us. They hire them." I laughed it off. My mom always saw danger where I saw potential. I told myself she just didn't understand that some men actually cared. Bryce met my friends, charmed everyone, and had a way of turning every conversation into a compliment about me. "She's the reason I'm changing how we do charity," he'd say, hand on my back, eyes full of pride. I ate it up. Because who doesn't want to be seen that way? The first time I visited his world was for a company gala. It was at a glass tower downtown, where everyone wore black and smiled like they were paid to. Bryce introduced me to his board members as the woman who keeps me grounded. They laughed like it was adorable. Later, I overheard one of them whisper, "Good move for optics." I didn't know what that meant back then. Optics. I thought it was just another corporate buzzword. A week later, my photo showed up on the company's social media, captioned, "Building bridges with the community." I didn't even know they'd taken it. Bryce said, "You make everything look good, Alicia. You're exactly what this company needs." It was flattering until it wasn't. Still, I told myself it was just part of being with someone powerful. I'd grown up watching women in my family handle difficult men with grace. I thought that was strength, endurance disguised as love. Then came the first little shift. He'd make small comments like, "You'd look more professional with your hair straight," or, "That dress is nice, but it's a little loud for this crowd." They sounded harmless at first, like helpful advice. But one day I realized he'd built an invisible checklist of how I should exist. What I wore, how I spoke, who I stood next to. There was a moment, a quiet one, that should have told me everything. We were driving home from a charity dinner. The radio was playing an old R&B song I loved. I started humming along. He turned it off mid-verse and said, "Let's not do that. No explanation, no apology, just silence." It was small, but it stuck. Still, I pushed the thought away. I told myself he was just tired, stressed, whatever excuse made me feel better. When you're in love, denial becomes a full-time job. Then came the big public gesture, the proposal. It happened at another gala, of course. Cameras, champagne, people clapping before I even said yes. The ring caught every light in the room. My heart was pounding, not with excitement, but with pressure. I said yes because saying no wasn't an option. After that night, our relationship became a headline. Local media called us Atlanta's most inspiring couple. My friends sent me articles with heart emojis. My mom stayed quiet. She didn't come to the engagement party. She said, "You don't look happy in those pictures." I told her the flash must have caught me mid-blink. Looking back, that's how it always was. Moments of truth caught mid-blink. Every warning was there, just blurred by the brightness of his world. He once told me, "You're the best thing that's ever happened to my image." I laughed, thinking he'd meant life. Image. That word should have chilled me. Instead, I kissed him and said, "I'm glad I make you look good." I didn't realize I was building my own stage, one he'd try to own, and one I'd eventually use to end him. If you've ever looked at someone and thought they were your safe place, only to find out they were building a cage, you'll understand what comes next. And if you've ever been told to stay quiet when everything inside you wanted to scream, you'll feel this one. Before I go on, tell me in the comments if you've ever ignored that gut feeling because love felt easier than truth. I read every single one. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. The next few minutes will remind you why silence is never safety. He always said I made him look good. I just never told him how good I'd look when the truth finally came out. The first time I realized my husband was using me, it came in the form of an email I wasn't supposed to see. It was a Tuesday morning, a few months after the engagement. Bryce had left his laptop open on the kitchen island, and I was making coffee before heading to the community center. His inbox pinged, and curiosity got the better of me. The subject line read, "Community Optics for IPO." It wasn't from me. It was from his PR director. The email said, "Having Alicia more visible in the next campaign will strengthen our diversity narrative ahead of the shareholder meeting. She's authentic, grounded, and visually perfect for press." I read it twice, thinking maybe I misunderstood. Then I saw Bryce's reply. "Good. Let's make her the face of our outreach program. The timing's perfect for the wedding." My stomach turned. I wasn't his partner, I was a strategy. When he walked in, I asked what it meant. He didn't flinch. "It's just business talk," he said. "Don't take it personally. They think in headlines." Headlines. That word stayed with me. I'd been falling in love, and he'd been writing press releases. That afternoon, he sent me a text with a winking emoji and said, "Lunch with investors tonight. You'd look stunning in that ivory dress." I stared at the message for a long time, wondering if he'd pick me the same way he picked his suits, based on what would photograph best. At dinner, the investors asked about my work. Bryce jumped in before I could answer. "Alicia runs a program for underprivileged kids," he said, smiling. "She's got such a big heart." One of them laughed. "So you're marrying into the Whitman empire and saving souls at the same time?" Bryce chuckled with them. "She keeps me human," he said, and everyone raised their glasses like it was romantic. I smiled because that's what you do when you realize you're part of someone else's pitch deck. The next morning, I opened my social media and saw a new post from Whitman Dynamics, a picture of me and Bryce at the dinner, captioned, "Empowering Communities Through Leadership and Love." My caption would have been different. Staged, edited, and approved by marketing. I didn't say anything. I told myself this was just what life looked like when you were with someone successful. But every time I saw my own face in one of his campaigns, it felt like I was disappearing a little more. Things changed again when I met his mother, Victoria. She hugged me with one arm and air-kissed my cheek. Her perfume smelled like money and superiority. "You're even prettier in person," she said, smiling just enough to show restraint. Bryce always said he admired strong women. The pause before strong felt like a slur. Dinner with her was an audition. Every question came laced with polite doubt. "Do you enjoy charity work, dear? Have you considered taking etiquette classes before the wedding? It must be exhausting, balancing your background with Bryce's world." I left that dinner feeling like a well-dressed imposter. Bryce said I was overreacting. "My mom's just protective. Don't take it personally." He said, "Don't take it personally," the same way some people say, "Shut up." A week later, he handed me a sleek folder titled Whitman Foundation Initiatives. Inside were headshots of me and a schedule of public appearances. "It's all set," he said. "You'll be amazing." "Public appearances for what?" I asked. "For us," he said, like it was obvious. "You'll be attending events as my fiancé. It's good PR. You're exactly what this company needs right now." Something in me went cold. "You mean what you need?" He smiled. "Same thing." That was the moment I realized he didn't see a woman, he saw a brand asset. One night, I told him I wanted to keep working after the wedding. He didn't raise his voice. He just smiled that rehearsed smile. "You don't have to do that anymore. I can take care of you." "I like my job," I said. "I know," he replied, pouring himself another drink. "But it doesn't look good for my wife to be clocking in at a community center while I'm in board meetings. It sends the wrong message." "The wrong message to who?" "To everyone," he said simply. Like that explained it all. I started to notice how often he said, "everyone," the invisible audience he performed for. It wasn't a marriage he was building, it was a brand narrative. He even started hiring stylists for me. This is just to make things easier for you, he said, handing me a black credit card. They'll take care of your wardrobe for upcoming events. Less stress. I stared at the card. You're trying to dress me, I said. He laughed. No, I'm just investing in our image. Ugh. I told him it made me uncomfortable. He shrugged. You'll thank me later. That night, lying in bed, I watched him sleep. His face looked peaceful, empty of performance, and I tried to remember if I'd ever seen him like that before the cameras, before the headlines. Maybe I never had. In the morning, I found a folder on the kitchen counter labeled Wedding Media Strategy. Inside was a list of publications, photographers, and PR talking points. The last note read, Goal: present authentic love story while reinforcing Whitman brand values of redemption and unity. Redemption and unity. That was the story he wanted to sell the billionaire reborn through love, and I was the prop that made it believable. When I showed Angela the folder, she stared at it and said, He's turning your relationship into a product. I tried to laugh, but it came out hollow. Maybe love's just good marketing. Ho. Angela looked at me like she could already see the storm coming. Be careful, Alicia. Men who see women as strategy don't stop once they win. I told her I could handle it. I believed that then. Belief is easy when you mistake control for care. That night, as Bryce toasted to our future, I smiled like everything was fine, but inside, something quiet shifted the first crack in the foundation he'd built around me. And in that silence, I decided that if he wanted a performance, I'd give him one worth watching. The shift came quietly, the way a storm creeps in before anyone notices the clouds. It started with suggestions. Bryce always called them that, as if they were optional. You'd look more polished if you straightened your hair. That lipstick's a little bold for an investor dinner. Maybe don't mention growing up in Westview. People might not relate. They weren't suggestions. They were edits. The first time he corrected me in public, it was at a cocktail event in Buckhead. A reporter asked how we met, and I told the truth that he'd shown up at my charity table and pretended to understand what after-school programs actually cost. People laughed. Bryce didn't. He put his arm around me, smiling for the cameras, and said, What she means is, I was inspired by her passion for the community. I laughed along, but inside, something went still. After that, he started managing my sentences like a PR team. Be softer when you talk about social issues, he'd say. Smile more when people bring up money. Don't get defensive, just be grateful. I used to believe I was grounded. Now I was constantly adjusting myself to fit whatever version of me he wanted that day. When we were alone, he was charming again, or maybe just strategic. He'd hold my hand, compliment my dedication, tell me I was making him better. He had a way of mixing affection with correction until I couldn't tell them apart. Angela noticed first. She said, You sound smaller every time we talk. I told her she was imagining it. But one night, I replayed a video from a recent gala. Bryce was mid-speech, and I stood behind him, smiling. I barely recognized myself silent, polished, background decor. The following weekend, he invited me to a board retreat. He said it would be good exposure for me. I packed my notes about community partnerships, thinking maybe I could actually contribute something. The meeting wasn't in an office, it was in a private lodge near Lake Oconee. The men there talked numbers, branding, and stock valuation. At one point, someone asked Bryce how marriage had changed him. He smiled, hand resting on my knee. It's taught me discipline. You know, how to manage expectations. They laughed. I sat there, smiling too, feeling every word like a pin in my skin. Later that night, when I told him it bothered me, he said, They were joking, don't be sensitive. Sensitive. That was his favorite word when I pushed back. The next morning, he handed me a tablet showing our engagement photos edited for the company's website. I didn't even know they were taking photos that day. In the caption below it read, Love grounded in purpose. I asked, Why is this on the corporate site? He didn't look up from his phone. Because people love stories. You and I are a great one. I told him it felt wrong. He said, No one cares how you feel, Alicia. They care how you look. That sentence carved a scar I never forgot. Soon, he started filtering my world. the friend invitations I never got, the texts from old colleagues that mysteriously stopped. My mom said, "You're harder to reach lately." I blamed my schedule, but deep down, I knew Bryce had made isolation look like luxury. Every new piece of jewelry was a chain disguised as a gift. Then came the gala at the governor's mansion, the first time I realized he didn't just want me controlled, he wanted me erased. It was a fundraiser for veterans. I wore a navy gown, something simple, elegant. Before we left, Bryce said, "Maybe wear the white one instead. The blue reads a little strong." I wore the navy anyway. Halfway through dinner, a senator's wife complimented my speech earlier that week at the youth conference. Bryce laughed lightly and said, "Oh, she gets carried away sometimes. I'm teaching her when to stop." The table laughed again. I excused myself, smiling politely, and walked to the restroom before my face betrayed me. In the mirror, I didn't look angry. I looked blank, like someone had replaced me with a quieter version. When I came back, Bryce whispered, "Don't make a scene. You'll thank me later." That night, I didn't speak the whole drive home. When we got there, he poured himself scotch, scrolled through his phone and said, "You handled tonight perfectly." I wanted to ask, handled what? But I didn't. I just nodded. Silence was easier. Later, when I turned off the lights, he said, "You know, I'm proud of you. Not every woman could adjust like this." Adjust. Another word for disappear. Days turned into routines, appearances, interviews, press photos. My work at the community center was quietly replaced by charity events with his name printed on everything. My cause became his brand. One afternoon, I got a call from the center's director. "We're sorry, Alicia," she said, "but your position's been reassigned. Bryce said you were stepping away after the wedding." I hadn't. When I confronted him, he didn't even look guilty. "You'll have more impact working beside me than under fluorescent lights with old computers." I told him it wasn't his choice. He smiled. "It was, actually." That was the first time I felt real fear, not because he raised his voice, but because he didn't need to. Control that quiet is the most dangerous kind. That night, he poured 2 glasses of wine, handed me one, and said, "You're lucky, you know. Most women would kill for this life." I looked around at the spotless kitchen, the marble, the flowers delivered on schedule. Everything looked perfect. Everything sounded wrong. He raised his glass. "To us, Atlanta's finest." I clinked mine against his. The sound was small, sharp, final. Inside, I thought, if perfection is this quiet, I'm already halfway gone. The morning he brought up the prenup, the sky over Atlanta was gray and heavy. He was sitting at the kitchen table, sleeves rolled up, stirring his coffee like a man about to deliver bad news disguised as logic. He started with, "It's just standard procedure." And that phrase, standard procedure, belongs in hospitals, not relationships. Bryce slid a folder across the table like it was nothing, just another business deal to sign before lunch. The folder was thick, with pages separated by yellow sticky notes and red flags marking where my initials should go. I looked at the title, Premarital Agreement. It had that cold, professional font that somehow makes everything inside feel legal even before you've read a word. He smiled, the same public smile I'd seen in every photo. "My lawyers drafted it, just protecting both of us." I flipped through the pages, and my stomach twisted tighter with every line. The agreement didn't just protect him, it erased me. If we divorced, I'd get nothing from his estate. No claim to assets, no access to marital funds. Even future earnings from anything, inspired by the Whitman brand, were his. I said, "You're not serious." He leaned back, calm as ever. "Alicia, this is normal. You know how many people would kill to sign this and have what we have?" "Have what?" I asked. "A husband who doesn't trust his wife?" He sighed, the way men do when they're sure they're smarter. "You're being emotional. It's not about trust, it's about protecting what I've built." I wanted to throw the papers at him, but all I did was nod. When power walks into a room wearing a smile, anger looks like bad manners. That night I called Angela. She didn't sound surprised. "He's consolidating control," she said. "It's not about money, it's about ownership. He's drawing a border around your life." Angela was the kind of woman who didn't sugarcoat truth. She was also the only person who'd ever looked Bryce in the eye and not blinked. She offered to review the document, and 2 days later, we met in her office downtown. She had it spread across her desk, marked up in red pen. "Here," she said, tapping one line. "He wants full control of any joint account. You'd have to request approval for withdrawals over 10,000. I laughed, but it came out broken. "Approval? From my husband?" Angela nodded. "And this section he included a non-disclosure clause. If he cheats, you can't speak publicly about it without risking a lawsuit." I felt something in me freeze. "He already planned for that?" "Men like Bryce always do," she said. I stared at the papers until the words blurred. It wasn't a prenup. It was a silencing agreement. Angela leaned forward, her voice softer now. "You don't have to sign this. You have leverage." "Leverage?" I asked. "He's worth hundreds of millions. I'm a community worker with student loans." "That's exactly why he needs you," she said. "Your image is worth more than his money right now. Don't underestimate that." I didn't want leverage. I wanted love. But love was starting to look like paperwork. When I told Bryce I needed time, he laughed. "You can have all the time you want, as long as it doesn't mess with the wedding schedule." He kissed my forehead before leaving for a meeting. That kiss felt like punctuation, not affection. A week later, he called. "Cheerful. My lawyers say we need this done before the engagement dinner. You can have your attorney add whatever you want." "I trust you." It was the word trust that did it. When you hear the same lie enough times, you start to wonder if it's an invitation to make it true. So I called Angela again. "If I sign, I want something in there for me." She knew what I meant before I explained. "An abuse clause?" "Yes. If there's any form of physical or emotional abuse, the agreement is void." Angela smiled, the kind of smile that knows how revenge is born, not in anger, but in quiet planning. "Smart," she said. "He'll sign it." Men like him always think they're too controlled to ever cross that line. 2 days later, the revised draft was ready. Bryce didn't even read it. He signed every flagged page like he was approving a marketing proposal. "Now we can finally move forward," he said, sliding the folder to me with a grin. The sound of his pen scratching across the paper was the first honest sound I'd heard from him in months. That night, he opened champagne, poured 2 glasses, and toasted to transparency. I wanted to tell him that real transparency didn't require lawyers, but I just smiled and drank. Later, he pulled me close and whispered, "See? This is how grown-ups handle things." His voice was soft, but it carried the kind of confidence only men with unchecked power have. I looked at him and realized that, in his world, compromise meant obedience. The next morning, while he was at work, I copied every document and stored them at Angela's office. Not out of fear, out of instinct. Something told me I might need them one day. A week later, we attended a pre-wedding fundraiser. Cameras flashed, reporters asked about our modern love story. Bryce said, "We're partners in every sense of the word." I smiled and thought, except the one that matters. After the event, we drove home in silence. Halfway there, he reached over, placed his hand on mine, and said, "You did great tonight. You make me look like the man I want to be." I stared out the window, lights from passing cars flickering across his reflection. For the first time, I wasn't flattered. I understood. He didn't want a wife. He wanted a mirror that reflected only what he liked about himself. And mirrors, eventually, crack. The night I found out about Hannah, I wasn't looking for proof. I was looking for silence. Bryce had just come home from a trip to New York meetings, as always, and he left his phone charging on the counter while he showered. I was making tea, pretending not to care that he'd been gone for 4 days without calling once. The phone buzzed. Once, twice. Then again. The screen lit up with her name, Hannah Price, his PR manager. The preview said, "The article went live. The photos are perfect. You really are the hero they needed." I stood there, tea forgotten, reading those words until they stopped making sense. The photos? The article? My pulse quickened. When he came out of the shower, towel around his waist, I asked, "Who's Hannah Price?" He froze for half a second too long. "She's the new PR coordinator." "Why?" I said, "She texted you about photos." He smiled like I was the one caught doing something wrong. You're jealous of my PR team now? The way he said it, amused, dismissive, bored, made my stomach twist. You didn't answer the question, I said quietly. He shrugged. She handles my image. It's literally her job. Does she handle your image or your ego? His jaw clenched, but he didn't raise his voice. Careful, Alicia. You're starting to sound like a headline. That was his way of saying shut up before I make you regret it. The next morning, I searched Hannah's name online. She wasn't hard to find: pretty, blonde, polished. Her Instagram was full of behind-the-scenes shots from company events. In one photo, Bryce stood beside her at a charity gala, hand resting just a little too comfortably on her back. The caption read, "Grateful to work with leaders who inspire integrity." Integrity! I almost laughed. A few weeks later, the cracks began to show in public. People whispered at events. One reporter asked me on a red carpet, "How do you balance being married to a man every woman seems to want?" I smiled, said something rehearsed about trust and communication, and Bryce squeezed my hand like I'd given the right answer. That night, I told Angela what was happening. She listened, arms crossed, her face unreadable. When I mentioned the texts, she asked, "You kept them, right?" I nodded. "Good," she said. "Don't delete anything. You're married to a brand, Alicia. And brands don't cheat, they rebrand the truth." That line stayed with me. A week later, I got another confirmation, not from a phone, but from a whisper. At a luncheon, one of Bryce's junior associates leaned in and said quietly, "He's been spending a lot of late nights at the office. With Hannah." She bit her lip, then added, "I'm sorry. You didn't hear it from me." When I confronted him again, he laughed. "You're paranoid. People talk because they're jealous. You think I'd risk everything for some 20-something assistant?" "Yes," I said simply. That stopped him. Just for a second. He looked at me like he was deciding whether I was worth arguing with. "You're imagining things," he said finally. "Don't embarrass yourself." That night, he didn't come home. The next morning, he showed up with flowers and a smirk. "I stayed at the Four Seasons," he said. "Too tired to drive. Want to check my GPS?" He said it like a joke, but the challenge was clear. I didn't answer. I just placed the flowers in the sink and turned on the water. The petals floated away, and he walked out of the kitchen without another word. That weekend, Angela sent me an email titled, "For Your Eyes Only." Inside were screenshots, internal PR messages, calendar invites, and one thread between Bryce and Hannah labeled Crisis Control. The subject line of his email to her read, "If this leaks, we pivot to Narrative B." Narrative B. I opened the attachment. It was a prepared statement about how Bryce Whitman and his team are committed to upholding integrity and learning from personal mistakes. Personal mistakes. That meant me, Angela said quietly. They're planning the fallout before it happens. He's not worried about exposure. He's preparing for it. I asked, "What am I supposed to do?" "Let him underestimate you," she said. "And when he thinks he's holding all the cards, flip the table." Bryce must have sensed something changing. He started being overly affectionate again, gifts, apologies without specifics, long dinners where he talked about our future. He even booked a weekend getaway to Charleston just for us. At the hotel, he turned off his phone and said, "Let's start fresh." I smiled, though part of me wanted to ask which version of us he was referring to, the one he lived with, or the one he sold to investors. That night, while he slept, I scrolled through his unlocked iPad. There it was again, Hannah's name. Another message. "Can't believe she bought the prenup story. You're brilliant." He told her about it, about the abuse clause, about everything. I stared at the screen until my hands went cold. That wasn't love. That was arrogance. He'd told his mistress about the one thing that could destroy him, convinced I'd never use it. The next morning, he ordered breakfast in bed and kissed my shoulder. "You look peaceful," he said. "I am," I replied. And I was for the first time in months. Because I knew something he didn't. Peace is what you feel when you've stopped asking permission to fight back. That night, back in Atlanta, I called Angela and said, "Keep that copy of the prenup safe. I might need it sooner than we thought." "How dare." And for the first time, she didn't tell me to be careful. She just said, "Good, you're finally awake." The week before the wedding, our house looked like a showroom, flowers arriving by the hour, stylists coming and going, planners whispering through headsets as if managing a political summit. Bryce loved the chaos. It made him feel important. He was on every call, approving menus and photographers, checking lighting for the ceremony like he was producing a movie. When I asked if we could scale back, he said, "Alicia, this is the most important day of our lives. People will remember it forever." He didn't mean our people. He meant the shareholders, the journalists, the donors, the audience. Every night, I lay awake beside him, wondering how you prepare to marry someone you no longer believe in. But leaving wasn't an option yet. Not until I had proof that could end the story his way or mine. So I started collecting emails, receipts, photos from events where Bryce claimed he was working late. One of them showed him and Hannah at a rooftop bar, his hand grazing hers. I sent everything to Angela's secure drive. She called 2 nights later. "If he's using company funds for personal trips, that's corporate fraud," she said. "Do you want me to dig deeper?" "Yes," I said. But quietly. I need to walk into that wedding knowing I'm not the one being played. The next day, she sent me a single text. "You were right." Attached was a bank statement showing expense reimbursements marked as PR coordination and client development. The dates matched his weekends with Hannah. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel angry. It was like watching a movie you'd already seen, where the ending never changes. That night, when Bryce came home, I was sitting in the kitchen, scrolling through my phone like nothing had changed. He kissed my head, told me he was glad I was relaxing, and went upstairs to shower. I looked at his half-empty wine glass and thought, "You really believe you're untouchable?" He wasn't. The following morning, Angela and I met at a quiet cafe in Decatur. She slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside were emails between Bryce and his financial officer, messages confirming they'd used company funds to cover the wedding. "So he's mixing personal and corporate money," she said. "If that gets out, he's done." I nodded slowly. "He's building a castle on borrowed bricks." "I?" Angela smirked. "And you're holding the receipt." I left the cafe calmer than I'd felt in months. For the first time, control was mine. At home, Bryce was rehearsing his vows in the mirror. He looked proud, confident, rehearsed. "Tell me if this sounds too formal," he said, reading from his notepad. I listened. Every line was about him, his journey, his redemption, how meeting Alicia taught me grace and purpose. There wasn't a word about love. When he finished, I said, "It's perfect. Just be yourself." He smiled. "I always am." I went upstairs, closed the door, and called Angela again. "I'm not walking away," I said. "Not yet. I'm walking through it. And when I do, it's going to be public." She was quiet for a moment. "Then we plan this like you would a campaign. Calm, strategic, controlled." That night, we met in her office after hours, the city lights glowing through the blinds. I laid out everything: emails, screenshots, bank documents, the prenup, even text messages between Bryce and Hannah. Angela reviewed everything with surgical focus. "We'll need 2 things. A trigger and a witness," she said. "You already have the clause. We just need him to activate it." I stared at her. "You mean the abuse clause?" She nodded. "You can't predict him, but you can corner him. If he crosses that line, even in public, it voids everything. The prenup, the silence, the power, it's all gone." I sat back in the chair, thinking how ironic it was. He'd signed his own undoing and didn't even notice. "Are you sure you want this public?" she asked finally. "Yes," I said. "He made our marriage a spectacle. Let him choke on the same spotlight he built." The next morning, Bryce's mother called. "The Whitmans are very proud," she said. "Your story is inspiring people, dear." Our story. That phrase made my skin crawl. She continued. "And remember, smile through everything. There's nothing more powerful than grace under pressure." I hung up before I said something ungraceful. That afternoon, while Bryce was out finalizing the rehearsal dinner, I met the tech crew setting up at the venue. I asked a simple question. "Can I control what plays on the LED screen during the reception?" The man shrugged. "Sure. Everything runs through a phone app linked to the projector." He handed me the tablet, and I smiled. Perfect. That night, I recorded a short video of my own, just my voice, steady and clear, reading from the emails between Bryce and Hannah. I didn't name them. I didn't have to. The words spoke for themselves. Angela helped me embed it into a slideshow file with timestamps. "It'll trigger when you cue it," she said. "You'll know when." The rehearsal dinner went off perfectly. Too perfectly. Bryce made a toast, talking about the power of unity and how love transforms. I smiled, clinking glasses, watching him perform the version of himself the world adored. Afterward, in the car, he said, "You looked incredible tonight. Just remember, tomorrow it's about the story. Keep it elegant. Don't let emotions get in the way." "Of course," I said softly. "It's just business, right?" He laughed. "Now you're learning." I looked out the window as Atlanta's skyline disappeared behind us. My reflection in the glass was calm, still, unreadable. That was the night I stopped being his prop and became his consequence. The morning of our wedding felt like standing inside a movie I didn't believe in anymore. Everything was beautiful, the manicured gardens of the Charleston Country Club, the pale pink roses cascading from the gazebo, the string quartet rehearsing under the oak trees. But beauty meant nothing when you knew the script was a lie. The planner kept saying, "You're glowing." I smiled because that was my cue. I had mastered it, the practiced expression of serenity that hid the quiet precision of revenge. Angela texted at 9:47 a.m. "Everything's set. The file is ready. Remember, stay calm. Let him hand you the microphone himself." Bryce was already at the venue, making sure the photographers got his best angles. His tuxedo fit like arrogance. When I arrived, he turned, smiled, and said, "Finally, the star of the show." Star. Not bride. His mother, Victoria, came over and kissed my cheek. "You look divine," she said sweetly. "This day will define both of you." She had no idea how right she was. I walked through the dressing suite, surrounded by hairstylists, assistants, and endless mirrors, reflecting a woman who looked perfect. Too perfect to be real. The makeup artist said, "You have such calm energy. Most brides panic." I looked at her through the mirror and said, "I stopped panicking a long time ago." Aru 1. By noon, the guests began to arrive, 300 people, all dressed in pastel confidence and curiosity. Reporters from local outlets mingled with investors and city officials. To them, this wedding was a merger, not a marriage. Bryce moved through the crowd like a CEO at a shareholder meeting, shaking hands, laughing too loud. I watched him pose with children from one of my old community programs, the same ones he'd cut funding for last quarter. The cameras loved him. When the ceremony started, the music swelled, and I walked down the aisle under the heavy Charleston Sunday. My dress shimmered softly, satin and structure. Nothing excessive, everything intentional. Each step felt measured. The sound of heels on marble like a countdown only I could hear. Bryce smiled when I reached him, his hand warm but lifeless in mine. The officiant began his speech about love, commitment, unity, the usual script for people pretending forever. Bryce squeezed my hand whenever the cameras turned our way. When it was his turn to speak, he slipped easily into performance mode. "Alicia," he said, looking straight into the crowd before glancing at me, "you taught me what redemption looks like. You made me a better man." The guests sighed in admiration. Even I almost believed him for half a second. Then it was my turn. I looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't see my husband. I saw the brand manager, the strategist, the liar who turned my existence into a PR campaign. My voice was calm when I said, "Bryce, you've shown me that love and truth don't always live in the same house. But I'm grateful because today, in front of everyone you've ever tried to impress, I finally understand who you are." He frowned slightly, confused, maybe worried, but the crowd clapped anyway, mistaking my words for poetry. The officiant pronounced us husband and wife. Cameras flashed. We kissed for the headlines. At the reception, Bryce made a toast. "To love that changes us," he said, raising his glass. "And to Alicia, my anchor and my mirror." Everyone cheered. I took my glass, smiled, and said quietly, "Careful what you reflect." Dinner was flawless plated salmon, champagne towers, laughter filling the air. Bryce thrived in the spotlight, moving from table to table, collecting compliments like currency. Every smile he gave looked practiced, every gesture rehearsed. When it was time for speeches, Victoria took the stage first. Her words were polished and shallow, ending with, "A marriage is about two people supporting each other's success." Then Bryce leaned over to me and whispered, "Your turn, Mrs. Whitman. Make it good for the cameras." That was his mistake. I stood, smoothed my dress, and took the microphone. "Thank you, everyone," I began, my tone warm, steady. "They say every great story has three parts: the beginning, the truth, and the reveal." End of Freya. The crowd laughed politely. Bryce smiled at first until the LED screen behind us flickered. The slideshow began innocently. Childhood photos, vacations, company events. Then, at the 5-minute mark, the tone shifted. Screenshots appeared, emails between Bryce and Hannah. Then bank statements. Then the photo from the rooftop bar. Laughter died mid-air. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "This," I said, gesturing to the screen, "is what it looks like when someone builds an empire on deceit and forgets the foundation they're standing on." Bryce's face drained of color. He stood, hand outstretched toward the tech crew. "Turn it off," he barked. But the video continued, his voice on audio, from one of the recorded calls Angela had found. "She'll never leave. She needs me for her image. And the prenup covers everything." Gasps filled the room. Victoria stood frozen, one hand on her pearls, eyes darting toward the cameras. The PR team tried to move, but it was too late. Every guest had their phones out. Bryce turned to me, eyes wide, furious. "What did you do?" I met his stare, calm as ever. I told the truth. He reached for me, voice low. "You're ruining everything." That's when it happened. The slap. Loud. Sharp. Final. The entire ballroom went silent. The sound echoed against crystal and glass. His hand lingered in the air, trembling not from regret, but from disbelief that he'd lost control. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I just straightened my back and looked straight at the cameras still flashing around us. Then, in a voice clear enough for every microphone to catch, I said, "And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what voids a prenup." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Bryce froze, realizing what he'd done not to me, but to himself. The lights from a dozen phones hit his face like judgment, and for the first time in his life, there was nowhere left to hide. I placed the microphone on the table, lifted my glass of champagne, and said softly, "To truth. It always wins in the end." The orchestra fell silent. The cameras clicked. And for the first time all night, I wasn't performing. For a second after it happened, the world held its breath. The champagne bubbles froze midair. The string quartet stopped playing. You could hear the weight of what he'd done settle over 300 people like dust after an explosion. Bryce's hand was still hovering in front of him, his face a perfect mask of panic trying to rearrange itself into charm. "Alicia, baby, I raised my hand before he could finish. Not to hit him, just to stop him. The air between us felt electric, charged with a clarity I'd never known before. "Don't," I said quietly. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried. It sliced through the silence like a blade. Around us, I saw faces, guests frozen in disbelief, phones shaking in people's hands, cameras still rolling. My father was already pushing through the crowd, but I shook my head slightly. He stopped. He knew. Bryce took a step closer, whispering urgently, "We can fix this. I just lost my temper. You'll make me look like a monster if you don't." "If I don't what?" I said, still calm. "Pretend this never happened?" The whispers grew louder. I saw Victoria, his mother, trying to signal the PR team. She mouthed, "Get her off stage." Too late. I picked up the microphone again. Every inch of my body ached to crumble, to cry, but I refused to give him that satisfaction. He wanted to control the narrative, so I gave him one he couldn't rewrite. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, steady as glass. "Apparently love doesn't hit back, but power does." Gasps! A few phones zoomed in. Bryce froze. "You all saw what happened," I continued. "You saw the kind of man the world calls visionary, charitable, inspiring. You saw what happens when the mask slips. Bryce lunged forward, trying to grab the mic, but Marcus, my cousin, stepped between us like a wall. Not tonight, he said firmly. I looked at Bryce and said, You just voided your own prenup, darling. You signed it without reading the clause about abuse. That line landed like a punch. Somewhere in the crowd, someone actually applauded. Bryce's jaw tightened. You think this will end well for you? He hissed. Oh, I'm not thinking, I said softly. I'm documenting. He turned toward the audience, hands raised in fake composure. Everyone, my wife is overwhelmed. It's been a stressful day. The giant screen behind us flickered again. Angela had timed it perfectly. Emails, bank statements, messages, all rolling in sequence. His voice from that recorded call echoed through the speakers. She's perfect for the campaign. The diversity optics alone are worth millions. The room erupted in shock. I stood completely still, letting his own words burn the empire he'd built. Victoria shouted, Turn it off! Her voice cracked. The screen stayed on. Bryce spun toward me, eyes wild. You planned this. No, I said. You did. You just didn't realize I was taking notes. He reached for me again instinctively, stupidly, and Marcus grabbed his wrist midair. Cameras flashed as security rushed in, confused about whom to protect. I looked straight into one of the cameras. You wanted the spotlight, Bryce. Now it's yours. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful, it was judgmental, collective, heavy. Every person in that ballroom was processing the same truth. The man they'd admired had just destroyed himself. I turned, walked to the head table, and picked up my champagne glass. My fingers trembled only slightly. This, I said, raising it, is to every woman who's ever been told to smile through humiliation. The crowd didn't move. Some guests started clapping, unsure if it was appropriate. Others filmed. But the ones who mattered, the ones with real power, stood still, faces pale. They knew exactly what this meant. Bryce stood there, his empire collapsing in real time. His father looked ready to explode. His mother looked like she was aging by the second. Then I dropped the ring into the glass. A soft clink. A sound that cut sharper than any scream. I set the glass on the table, turned to Angela, who was standing near the back, and nodded once. She nodded back. The contract was done. The performance was over. As I walked past Bryce, he said through clenched teeth, You'll regret this. I leaned close enough for only him to hear. I already did, for 2 years. When I stepped outside, the night air hit me like freedom I hadn't felt in years. The scent of jasmine, the hum of traffic beyond the gates, the faint sound of guests murmuring inside, all of it felt like the world exhaling. Angela met me by the car. You okay? I smiled faintly. Better than okay. She handed me her phone. It's already live. Someone streamed the whole thing. The video title blinked on screen. Billionaire CEO slaps wife during wedding speech gets exposed in front of 300 guests. Millions of views were already ticking upward. I stared at it, then handed the phone back. He always wanted a viral moment. Angela laughed, half in disbelief. You just made sure it had a moral. I leaned against the car door, feeling the bruised side of my face start to swell. It hurt, yes, but the ache felt honest earned. Bryce had built an empire on image. Tonight, he gave the world the truth. The flash of lights inside the ballroom spilled out through the glass doors. Security, chaos, confusion. Reporters were already outside the gate, shouting questions. I ignored them. Angela opened the passenger door. You ready? I nodded. Drive. As we pulled away, I glanced once in the rearview mirror. The white tents glowed like ghosts against the dark sky. Somewhere inside, Bryce was still trying to control the story, but it was too late. Because for the first time, the story didn't belong to him, it belonged to me. By the time the video hit 1 million views, Bryce's PR team had already gone into crisis mode. My phone buzzed non-stop. Reporters, lawyers, old acquaintances suddenly worried about my well-being. I didn't answer a single one. The only call I took was from Angela. It's spreading faster than we expected, she said. You might want to lay low. I laughed softly. He's the one who should hide. Across every platform, the story had taken on a life of its own. Whitman wedding meltdown. CEO slaps bride during speech. Diversity campaign gone wrong. The hashtags multiplied. Even the corporate channels that once idolized Bryce were running the clip on loop. When I stepped out of my apartment 2 days later, a camera crew was waiting across the street. One reporter shouted, "Alicia, do you have a statement?" I looked right into the lens. "You've already seen it," I said. Then I walked away. Angela met me at her office later that morning, her expression a mix of exhaustion and awe. "You realize you've just rewritten every PR manual in existence?" "Good," I said. "It's about time truth had better marketing." She smiled faintly. "Bryce's father called this morning. He's trying to settle. They're offering you $8 million for a non-disclosure." I didn't hesitate. "Tell him I don't sell silence." Bryce's empire started cracking by the hour. Sponsors withdrew. Stock prices plummeted. His face, once plastered across Forbes covers, was now a meme. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then the statement came. Bryce released a video from what looked like his home office. He wore a navy sweater, the casual sincerity look. "There are two sides to every story," he said, voice trembling just enough to seem human. "I made mistakes, but my wife exploited them for attention." I watched it with Angela. Halfway through, she paused it and said, "He's trying to bait you. He won't get it." But I knew I couldn't stay silent forever, not when the story was already being spun into something else. So I agreed to one interview. Just one. I chose 60 Minutes. Not a gossip show. Not social media. A place where truth mattered more than drama. The interviewer asked, "Why speak now?" I looked straight into the camera. "Because I want people to understand something. Power isn't about money. It's about control. And when someone tries to take yours away, the most dangerous thing you can do is give it back." The host nodded. "Do you consider what happened revenge?" I smiled slightly. "No, revenge implies I wanted to hurt him. I just stopped helping him lie." The segment went viral again, but this time, it wasn't just entertainment, it was conversation. Women wrote in saying they'd left abusive relationships. Men commented that they'd finally seen the kind of control that doesn't leave bruises. Meanwhile, the legal side unfolded quietly, but ruthlessly. Bryce's assault was public record. Combined with the prenup clause, it voided everything: his financial protections, confidentiality agreements, even intellectual property he'd hidden in shell companies. When his lawyers tried to negotiate, Angela sent them a single line. Per Clause 7B, physical abuse nullifies all prior conditions. Consider this your official notification. A week later, I received court confirmation. The marriage was annulled. The settlement was approved. The funds he owed me, his breach penalty, were transferred in full. Angela came to my apartment with champagne. "You did it," she said. I opened the bottle, poured 2 glasses, and looked out at the Atlanta skyline. "He destroyed himself. I just turned on the lights." She raised her glass. "To peace through truth." I was May. We clinked glasses, and for the first time, the sound didn't echo pain. It sounded like freedom. In the weeks that followed, I kept to myself. I went back to the community center, the one Bryce once called too small to matter. The kids didn't ask questions, they just hugged me. One of them, a 10-year-old girl named Maya, handed me a note she'd written in crayon. "You're brave because you didn't let the bad guy win." I kept that note on my fridge. Bryce disappeared from public life. His company's board forced him out, his father resigned, and his mother's social calendar mysteriously cleared. The mansion that once hosted charity galas went dark. But I didn't watch it happen with bitterness. I didn't need to. Watching the truth do its work was enough. One afternoon, Angela called again. "You're trending. Someone turned your wedding speech into an empowerment video." I laughed. Fitting, considering I never got to finish it. "Would you like to?" she asked. So I did. I booked a small local theater, the same place we used to host youth fundraisers. Cameras rolled. The audience was full of women who'd lived versions of my story. On stage, I said, "He once told me silence is class. I've learned silence is consent. And I refuse to consent to my own erasure." Applause broke out. I let it fade before I added, "Your voice is your power. Use it, even when your hands shake." That clip became the most shared video of the year in advocacy circles. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. Later that night, I walked home under soft city lights, thinking how strange it felt to live without fear, to breathe without calculating someone else's reaction. Angela texted, "He's officially bankrupt. Do you want me to send you the filing?" I typed back, "No need. I already got what I came for." And it wasn't money. It was the simple, unglamorous kind of freedom that comes when your truth no longer needs defending. I poured myself a glass of wine, looked out the window, and whispered to the empty room, "Peace looks good on me." By the third week, Bryce's empire was in freefall. His company's stock had lost 40% of its value, board members were resigning in clusters, and the media called it the Whitman collapse. Every channel had a panel dissecting his public downfall, as if it were an economic event and not the natural consequence of arrogance meeting accountability. I didn't watch any of it live. Angela did. She'd call with updates, her tone caught between disbelief and satisfaction. "They've frozen his assets," she said one morning. The SEC opened an inquiry into his offshore accounts. I was standing in my kitchen, stirring coffee. "He used charity money for marketing," I said quietly. "They won't find integrity where there never was any." She exhaled. "You're scaring powerful men, Alicia. You realize that, right?" "Good," I said. "They should be scared of the truth, not the people who tell it." The day after that call, a thick envelope arrived by courier, an official letter from Bryce's attorney. Inside was a document titled Settlement Proposal Confidential Resolution. It offered me $10 million and lifetime non-disclosure. I laughed when I saw it. Not the polite kind of laugh you give in disbelief. The kind that starts deep in your chest because it's so insulting it's almost funny. When I showed Angela, she grinned. "You should frame it. It's proof he still thinks you can be bought." I wrote one sentence at the bottom of the letter. "Tell him to keep his money and choke on it." Then I signed it and sent it back. That afternoon, Bryce called for the first time since the wedding. His voice was different, still smooth, but hollowed out, like a salesman with nothing left to sell. "We don't have to destroy each other," he said. "Funny," I replied. "I didn't destroy you. I just stopped covering the cracks." He went silent for a moment. Then, "You think people will remember you as the victim? You humiliated me in front of everyone." "Bryce," I said calmly, "you humiliated yourself. I just made sure there was a record." He hung up. That was the last time we spoke. Over the next few days, his world kept shrinking. His board voted him out as CEO. His family foundation dissolved. The mansion in Buckhead was listed for sale under a trust, but no one wanted to buy property with that much bad energy attached. Reporters kept reaching out to me for follow-ups. "How does it feel to take down a billionaire? Do you have any regrets?" I ignored them all. It wasn't about taking him down. It was about walking away without flinching. But one story caught my attention. A journalist from The Atlantic wrote, "She didn't destroy his career. She revealed the cost of manufacturing perfection." That line stayed with me for days. Meanwhile, Hannah, the PR mistress, vanished from social media. Someone leaked her resignation email to a blog, where she wrote, "I thought I was building something with him, but I was just another campaign." For once, I didn't feel angry. Just tired. That's what the aftermath feels like. Not triumph, just quiet exhaustion from carrying something too heavy for too long. Angela handled most of the legal cleanup. She was ruthless in ways I couldn't be. When Bryce's father tried to call again through intermediaries, this time she blocked every path. "They're trying to contain the fallout," she said. "They want a narrative where you forgive them. Then they'll be waiting a long time." Weeks passed. I started spending more time at the community center again. The kids didn't care about headlines or scandals. To them, I was still Miss Alicia, the woman who helped them build birdhouses and write scholarship essays. One day, an older volunteer pulled me aside. "You know," she said softly, "people think courage looks loud, but sometimes it's just walking into the same place with your head still high." That hit me harder than any applause. Later that evening, as the sun went down over the parking lot, I saw my reflection in the glass door. No makeup, no perfect lighting. Just me. Free. Uncurated, unbranded. Angela showed up unannounced, holding a folder. "Thought you'd want to see this," she said. Inside were the final court filings. The state of Georgia versus Whitman Industries ethics and misconduct violations. "Justice has a paperwork trail," she said, handing it to me. I smiled. "Good. Let them file it under consequences." That night, I sat at my dining table, surrounded by silence, the good kind. The kind that feels earned. I opened a blank notebook and started writing not about Bryce, but about rebuilding, about the women I wanted to help, about the ones who never got their chance to speak. Angela called again a few days later. "You know, with your story, we could start a foundation, something real. Women's advocacy, financial literacy, maybe even a scholarship fund." I looked at the note from Maya, still pinned to my fridge. "You're brave because you didn't let the bad guy win." "Yeah," I said. "Let's do that. Let's make something that lasts longer than scandal." A month later, the Morgan Foundation launched quietly, no press releases, no grand gala, just an open door in a brick building downtown. We offered workshops for women leaving abusive relationships, financial counseling, legal referrals. At first, only a few came, then dozens, then hundreds. Each woman walked in with her own version of silence and walked out with something closer to power. And that, more than any viral video, was the victory I wanted. One afternoon, a young journalist dropped by to interview me for a local segment. She asked, "What made you keep going after everything?" I thought about it for a long moment before saying, "Because peace doesn't come from avoiding storms, it comes from knowing you can survive them." When she left, Angela laughed. "That's going to be the pull quote everywhere." I smiled. "Let them quote it. Just make sure they spell peace right." And that evening, I locked up the office myself. The city lights flickered in the distance, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was escaping anything. I wasn't running anymore. I was arriving. The invitations started showing up in my inbox. Before the dust even settled, talk shows, panels, podcasts, magazines. Everyone suddenly wanted to hear the woman who exposed her billionaire husband. They wanted drama, but I had no interest in replaying pain for ratings. Angela handled most of the inquiries, but one day she said, "Alicia, there's one you should consider. Women in Leadership Summit, no gossip, just real conversations." I thought about it for a week before agreeing. The event was held in New Orleans, inside a glass-walled convention hall overlooking the river. I stood backstage, listening to the moderator introduce me. Alicia Morgan, founder of the Morgan Foundation, advocate for women's financial independence, and living proof that truth can rebuild what lies destroy. It wasn't flattery that hit me. It was the word rebuild. I'd spent so long surviving that I'd forgotten rebuilding was even possible. When I stepped onto the stage, the room was full executives, students, teachers, single mothers, women from every corner of the country. They didn't clap like fans. They clapped like witnesses. I told them the truth, not the scandal, not the viral headline, but the quieter parts no one films. "Courage," I said, "doesn't start in front of cameras. It starts in small decisions the moment you stop apologizing for your own clarity." After the session, a woman approached me with tears in her eyes. "I left my husband last week," she said. "After watching your story, I just needed to say thank you." It wasn't pity I felt. It was connection, the kind that makes survival worth retelling. Angela was waiting outside the hall, grinning. "You handled that like a pro." "Funny," I said. "For years he made me feel like I didn't belong in rooms like this." She nudged me. "And now you're the reason they exist." That night, we sat at a rooftop bar, the Mississippi lights reflecting off our glasses. For once, the conversation wasn't about legal filings or damage control, it was about purpose. "I want to expand the foundation," I told her. "Scholarships, mentorship programs, maybe a partnership with shelters. Something sustainable." Angela leaned back. "Then we do it. I'll handle the boring paperwork. You handle the people." The next few months were a blur of progress. Donations poured in not because of pity, but because people believed in what we were building. Women came to volunteer, some of them former employees of Bryce's company. They said things like, You showed us what accountability looks like." It was strange he had tried to make me invisible, and now his downfall had amplified my voice louder than ever. But I stayed grounded. I refused to let the noise define me again. One afternoon, I received an unexpected letter from Bryce's mother, Victoria. Her handwriting was immaculate, her tone restrained but raw. It read, "Alicia, I don't expect forgiveness, but I need to say what my pride never allowed me to before. You were the best thing that ever happened to him, and the worst thing he didn't deserve. I hope one day I can atone for my silence." I sat in my office holding that letter, feeling something I hadn't expected. Closure. Not sympathy, not satisfaction, just an ending that no longer hurt. Angela found me staring out the window. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said softly. "Some apologies aren't meant to be accepted. They're meant to end the echo." Hissing. Later that week, the Morgan Foundation hosted its first gala, not the kind Bryce used to throw, but a small, heartfelt event inside the same community center where I once worked. No designer gowns, no press walls, just laughter, music, and a silent auction that raised enough money to fund 2 years of operations. During the dinner, Angela insisted I make a toast. I stood at the podium, looking out at faces that reflected something I hadn't seen in years: trust. "I used to think revenge was about payback," I began. "But it's not. It's about reclaiming the parts of yourself someone tried to erase. It's about standing in your truth so solidly that no one can rewrite it." Applause followed, but I wasn't speaking for applause. I was speaking for every woman who'd ever traded her peace for approval. Afterward, a journalist approached me for a quote. "What's next for you, Alicia?" I smiled. "Peace. And paperwork. Both are underrated forms of power." And a redo. When the event ended, I lingered in the hall alone, watching volunteers stack chairs and fold tablecloths. The room smelled faintly of candles and coffee, a mix of exhaustion and fulfillment. Angela walked up beside me, holding 2 glasses of leftover champagne. "You ever think about what he's doing right now?" "Sometimes," I admitted. "But mostly, I think about what I'm doing now, and that feels better." She clinked her glass against mine. "To redemption." I raised mine. "Too. Never mistaking silence for grace again." The following morning, I received an email from 60 Minutes. They wanted to do a follow-up this time, not about the scandal, but about the Morgan Foundation's success. I stared at the screen for a moment, smiling. "He used to say he made me relevant," I said to myself. "Turns out, relevance isn't about being seen. It's about making something worth seeing." That night, I went home, fed my dog, poured tea, and sat on the porch watching the city lights blink against the dark. The kind of peace I felt wasn't cinematic. It was steady, earned, quiet. The empire he built on control had collapsed, but something better had risen from it: dignity, community, and a voice that didn't need permission anymore. I closed my eyes, letting the cool night air wash over me, and thought not of the slap, or the cameras, or the noise, but of the moment I picked up that microphone and chose to speak. That was the real redemption, the kind you don't post about, the kind you live. The morning light spilled through the kitchen window, soft and gold against the hardwood floor. I was barefoot, coffee in hand, reviewing grant proposals for the foundation when I realized something simple but profound. My life was finally quiet, not empty, just quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't ask permission. The world had moved on from the wedding scandal months ago. New stories replaced mine, louder scandals drowned out old ones. But that was fine. I didn't want to be trending anymore. I wanted to be living. The Morgan Foundation was thriving. We'd expanded to 3 states, launched workshops in partnership with local colleges, and created emergency housing grants for women who needed to leave in a hurry. The walls of the office were covered in photos of smiling faces, people rebuilding their lives, not defined by what broke them. Angela still teased me that I was the calmest CEO she'd ever met. I told her it was because I'd already survived the loudest kind of chaos. One Friday afternoon, I got an email from 60 Minutes again. The subject line read, "Where is she now?" They wanted to do a follow-up piece, to revisit the story not as scandal, but as transformation. I hesitated. That night, I sat on my porch watching the city lights shimmer. A breeze rustled through the magnolias, carrying the scent of rain. I thought of my grandmother's words, the ones she'd whispered to me years ago when I told her I was scared of walking away. Baby, freedom doesn't ask for applause. It just asks that you don't waste it. End of Trumped. So I agreed. The interview aired 2 weeks later. This time, there were no viral edits or scandal clips, just a calm conversation about what happens after the storm. The interviewer asked, "If you could tell your younger self one thing, standing at that altar again, what would it be?" I smiled. That you can love someone deeply and still walk away with dignity. That leaving isn't failure, it's choosing peace over performance. And? The host nodded, and the room went still for a moment before moving on. But that pause, that silence, felt like the sound of healing. After the segment aired, letters started arriving at the foundation. Some were from women who'd left abusive relationships. Others were from men admitting they'd never understood emotional abuse until they saw the video. One note said, "You taught me that respect isn't a luxury, it's the baseline." I kept that one pinned to my office wall. Meanwhile, Bryce stayed invisible. The last I'd heard, he'd relocated to a small town in Oregon, running a modest consulting firm under another name. The irony wasn't lost on me. He'd spent his whole life chasing the spotlight, only to end up hiding from it. But I didn't feel triumphant anymore, just detached. His life was his consequence. Mine was my freedom. Angela came into my office one morning, tossing a newspaper onto my desk. "They're running another piece on you," she said, smirking. "Apparently, you're now a symbol of resilience." I laughed. "I'm just a woman who refused to keep secrets." She leaned against the doorway. "You know, that might be the same thing." That afternoon, I visited the community center again. The building had changed, new paint, new furniture, but the laughter sounded the same. One of the girls from my old mentorship group ran up to hug me. "Miss Alicia, we watched your interview in class. My mom said you're famous." I smiled. "Tell your mom I'm just stubborn." When I left, the sky was beginning to turn that warm southern pink. The streets glowed, wet from a light rain, and I thought about how far I'd come from that aisle lined with roses and pretense to this standing on solid ground, alone but free. That night, Angela called again. "We got invited to the National Women's Forum in D.C. They want you to keynote." I hesitated. "I don't know, Angela. I'm not a politician or a brand, I'm just—" "Exactly," she said. "You're real. And that's what people need to hear." So I went. The ballroom was filled with women who had fought their own battles in silence: executives, soldiers, teachers, survivors. When I walked on stage, the lights were bright, but this time they didn't blind me. They illuminated me. I took a deep breath and began. A year ago, I stood in front of 300 people and found my voice by accident. I thought that moment was the end of something, but it was actually the beginning of peace. And peace isn't about the absence of noise. It's about owning your silence. The crowd rose to their feet, clapping not out of spectacle but solidarity. Later that evening, as I stood near the exit shaking hands, an older woman approached me. "My husband was powerful too," she said. "For years I let that word silence me. Thank you for reminding me that dignity doesn't need permission." I squeezed her hand. "You already had it. You just needed to say it out loud." When I got home to Atlanta that night, I poured myself a glass of wine and walked out onto the balcony. The air was cool, the streets quiet. I thought about the girl who once stood trembling in a lace dress, believing silence was strength. I wish she could see this version of herself now, unshaken, unafraid, unowned. The phone buzzed with a message from Angela. "You did good tonight. You changed something in that room." I typed back. "Not just in that room. In me too." Then I set the phone aside, leaned against the railing, and watched the city breathe. The world would forget the headlines eventually, but that didn't matter, because the story had never been about him. It had always been about me, and every woman who'd ever been told to keep quiet for the sake of grace. Freedom wasn't a destination. It was a decision I kept making every day. And for the first time, I knew this peace wasn't borrowed. It was mine. If you believe in justice told through truth, hit subscribe. Stay with this channel, where every story reminds you, peace isn't the absence of pain, it's what you choose after it.